we don't have a fucking Muslim problem. We have a Jewish supremacy problem. And I think people need to wake the fuck up to that. We've got a country that is mass murdering fucking Muslims. How about the fucking soup kitchen workers? How about the hundreds of journalists they've killed? How about all the children that they've sniped? How about the starving people that they've murdered at aid stations? How about the ambulance workers that they've gunned down? How about Hind Rajab? I mean, you want me to keep fucking going?
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I am a reaver and I was taught how to pray Salah.
That means every single time I pray,
the person who taught me gets the reward.
5 times a day, from Fajr to Isha.
If you want to support someone like me in learning Salah,
then sponsor 10 people for just £100. Remember the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, charity does not decrease wealth. Click the button and donate now.
Assalamu alaikum brothers and sisters. If you're watching this video and it's Salah time, please pause it and go pray and come back when you're done. Please check out the description section of this video to support the channel. Our brother Sneako has been on a roll with the big collabs recently, and this time around he hosted Dan Bilzerian. I've reacted to their previous collaborations on the topic of Palestine, but this latest one was so comprehensive in terms of Dan exposing the ugly truth about Israel, even Sneako looked stunned by what he was hearing. Let's watch the first clip.
It's literally been ruled a genocide by, the International Committee for Genocide or whatever, like the scholars, they all ruled that it was a genocide. I mean, every single person in the world is figuring out what's going on, and we are just being dragged along as a fucking puppet for this genocidal country that just wants to steal more land, which, by the way, is like completely illegal. Like, you can't steal land anymore. We have the UN, like there's the Geneva Conventions, like we put things in place to where, countries just cannot steal land anymore. And that's literally what they're doing on the West Bank. That's what they're doing today in Gaza. They just invaded Gaza. And, they're trying to do this under the guise of like, oh, we need to get our hostages back. It's like, you motherfuckers have 9,000 hostages right now. You know what I mean? You're trying to make this about you getting like 40 back. It's just all bullshit. They let October 7th happen. They have the best surveillance in the world. Like, they knew what was going on. Like, they took 6 hours to respond, and when they did respond, they responded by killing their own citizens. Because what did they want? They wanted a massive tragedy so that they could justify stealing land and ethnically cleansing the Palestinians. And that's exactly what they're doing. This whole like script of, but October 7th and beheaded babies and all this bullshit they fed us, that was fucking 2 years ago. Like, what are you talking about? And it was a small attack. It's like, if you take out the actual IDF soldiers and you focus on just civilians, it was like 300 and something civilians that were killed, and probably the majority of that was killed by the fucking IDF themselves when they're shooting fucking Hellfire missiles from Apache helicopters at vehicles, and they're shelling kibbutzes with the tanks. They killed more than 500 Palestinian civilians that year already. So if anything, this was a reaction to what they had done. So this whole thing of like October 7th justifies this genocide. It's just absolute propaganda and nonsense.
If they lose the American support base completely, which is very likely to happen, they say Israel has the right to exist. They cannot exist if they don't have our money and our support.
Yeah, I don't think they have a right to exist. It's stolen land. I know they're terrorists. They're, living in apartheid right now. They're conducting a genocide. They're stealing land. I mean, they're doing everything that would qualify you as a terrorist. So I don't know why anybody's referring to them as anything other than a terrorist state. And, terrorists need to be eliminated. I mean, that's what they taught us about Muslims, right? Well, Muslims aren't in control of our fucking country right now. Like, our problems are not because of fucking Muslims. They want to paint it like that. In America, we don't have a fucking Muslim problem. We have a Jewish supremacy problem. And I think people need to wake the fuck up to that. What we need to do is remove this Jewish supremacy from our country. We need to remove Israel's control of America. That is the crux of the issue. These are people that are keeping Israel Jewish. These are people that believe that Jews are better than everybody else.
I think it's important that Dan gave a reminder that despite all the distractions going on online, there is still an active genocide taking place in Gaza. As he said, this is not just the pro-Palestine stance, it is the opinion of various qualified experts. Dan was correct to point out that additional to committing genocide, Israel is also currently stealing land in both Gaza and the West Bank, which is completely illegal. And credit to Dan for calling out the Israeli return the hostages propaganda. I must add that all of Israel's hostages could have been returned 2 years ago, but they themselves refused the offer and instead chose to bomb Gaza day in and day out since then, where ironically those same hostages are being held. And like Dan said, the hypocrites in the Israeli government are currently holding over 9,000 Palestinian hostages who they refuse to release. Dan claimed that the Israeli regime were in on the October 7, 2023 attack so that they could use that as an excuse to justify ethnically cleansing Gaza in order to take over that territory. I've also heard other reliable sources back up Dan's claim that out of the 1,000 people that lost their lives on that day, only a few hundred were civilians, with the rest being Israeli military. And speaking of which, as Dan stated, it is well documented that the IDF killed many of their own citizens that day, again as part of the bigger Gaza takeover plan. Dan made a valid point when he said that Israeli forces had killed over 500 Palestinians in 2023 leading up to October 7th, and that October 7th happened in reaction to that. No loss of life is justifiable, and as Dan said, for Israel to still be using October 7th, 2023 as an excuse to kill Palestinians in 2025 is disgusting propaganda that nobody believes. As Dan highlighted, this is straight up terrorism, and any nation that operates outside of the parameters of international law like this should not be recognised as a legitimate country. Dan Bilzerian put this down to the Jewish supremacy problem we have in positions of political power throughout the world. Like he said, despite the relentless Israeli propaganda blaming Muslims for everything, if Israel's control over the West was relinquished, the world would be a much more peaceful place. Let's watch the next clip.
The Judeo-Christian values that people like Charlie Kirk are pushing were to put and pit everybody against Muslims because they need an us versus them mentality. But when you look into it, there's no basis for Judeo-Christian values.
Yeah, no, they're two religions that have, almost nothing in common aside from the Old Testament. And, and a lot of, the Muslim religion has those, some of the New Testament, Old Testament stories in there as well. So the Muslim religion and the Christian religion are actually very similar with regards to how they look at Jesus and the Virgin Mary and, which to me are some of the pillars, obviously, of Christianity, because Christianity is based on Christ and the Muslims believe he's a great prophet. The Jews believe that he's in hell burning and shit. So to me, I look at those three religions and it's like two can, coexist and one has, is at odds with the other two. But we've just been indoctrinated that like Muslims are terrorists, jihadis, Sharia law, like, they throw out these little catchphrases and it gets people all riled up.
Netanyahu went on Fox News the day after Charlie Kirk's assassination and started blaming Marxists working with radical Islamists.
I mean, they brag about how good they are at assassinations. If you were on their side and you knew somebody as influential as Charlie Kirk was going to turn on you, which would be catastrophic for their movement, would you just let them do it? I mean, you've killed hundreds of thousands of children. Are you going to stop at one random American?
He opposed that war in Iran. He was very vocal about that. He said that this war in Iran should not have happened. Look, it
shouldn't have happened. They were literally willing to say that they would never have nukes. They killed the fucking chief negotiators. They've never been a nuclear threat. They've always allowed for nuclear inspection. Unlike Israel, they don't have intercontinental ballistic missiles. Like they were never a threat to us. It's just all bullshit. They've got a country that is mass murdering fucking Muslims in their fucking backyard, and they can't take them out, and we're worried that they're going to be a threat to us. Like, that's just such nonsense.
I said the day of that I think it was Mossad. Look, I mean, what happened last week? They bombed Qatar. They bombed Doha. They bombed a U.S. ally. They got away with it.
And nobody's talking about it, by the way. Nobody's talking about that. You got the blame shifted right off. The whole conversation just went to Charlie.
Killed Yemen leadership, Hamas leadership, Iranian leadership. They've killed how many different foreign leaders?
How about the soup kitchen workers? How about the hundreds of journalists they've killed? How about all the children that they've sniped? How about the starving people that they've murdered at the aid stations? How about the ambulance workers they've gunned down? How about Hind Rajab? I mean, you want them to keep going? These are people that they had no motive to kill. You're going to tell me they're not going to kill somebody that could be detrimental to their regime? Like, yeah, right. I don't think there's a need for increased censorship. I don't think that we should be doxing people no matter what they say about Charlie Kirk. People are entitled to react however they want to react. Encouraging violence obviously is wrong, but to celebrate somebody's death, that's not illegal. If Bibi Netanyahu got killed tomorrow, I'd be doing fucking cartwheels and jumping jacks in my fucking house. I get a cake to celebrate.
Sneako was correct when he said that the Judeo-Christian propaganda that the now deceased Charlie Kirk was pushing was designed to amplify discrimination against Muslims. As Dan pointed out, Islam and Christianity have more in common than Judaism and Christianity in regards to Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him. I would also add that Islam has more in common with Judaism than Judaism has with Christianity in terms of monotheism. So the whole concept of Judeo-Christian values or Christian Zionism in regards to opposing Islam makes no sense whatsoever. Dan was right to call this out as being yet more Israeli scaremongering propaganda that villainizes Muslims. Both Sneako and Dan are of the opinion that Benjamin Netanyahu is behind the Charlie Kirk assassination, especially given the Israeli Prime Minister's track record of killing hundreds of thousands of children, civilians, journalists, aid workers, emergency service personnel, and even recognised political leaders, as the guys pointed out. As Sneako said, Netanyahu's repeated appearances on US media platforms to deny any involvement just incriminates him further. And like Dan said, Netanyahu is mass murdering Palestinians for his political ambitions, so what's one American to him, especially one who defected from the ranks? I agree with Dan that encouraging violence is not the right thing to do, but if Netanyahu was to meet the same fate, the majority of the world would not shed a single tear. Let's roll the next clip.
I was supposed to debate Tommy Robinson, but he backed out of that. He's a super anti-Muslim, and I think he's going to have a harder time debating me because I think he's used to debating Muslims, and when he debates a Muslim, they've had a lot of, issues over there. But that to me is more of an immigration poverty issue, and they paint it as a Muslim issue. Some of these people that, are coming in, they happen to be Muslim because they're, a quarter of the fucking globe. So statistically, you're going to have a decent amount of Muslims. These Jews want to paint it as a Muslim problem, and it's really an immigration problem. And if you look at all the NGOs that are pushing these open borders, many of them are, Jewish run or Jewish funded. I think that Christians and Muslims need to unite.
Yeah, Tommy Robinson, I think we were supposed to set up that debate. It was Aiden and I setting it up with you last year, and something happened. I think he backed out, or maybe he was afraid. If Tommy Robinson would speak to somebody like you, his whole MO would get exposed. He's not really anti-immigration. He said publicly he likes Indian immigrants. He is clearly a big supporter of Israel.
I mean, even Piers Morgan has flip-flopped on it.
Yeah, he completely changed his mind. He's now saying it's ethnic cleansing. I don't know what made him shift.
He's losing his base. He's losing his fucking base. Everybody knows that he's full of shit. He realizes, he could have all the fucking donors in the world, but if his audience turns on him and they all fucking hate him, nobody's going to listen to him. And so that's why he's doing it. He's not doing it because it's some moral obligation. He's had this information for a fucking year and a half. He knows what's going on. He's just doing that because it's become so unpopular. There's no defense of their actions.
Tucker Carlson was pushing for the Iraq war for 3 decades, and now he's saying that 9/11 was Israel on Piers Morgan. So all these talking heads that were so pro-Zionist and pro-Jewish for so long, now that they see that they can't have any sort of viewers without pushing back a little bit, they shift. I don't find it genuine at all either.
Israel is panicking right now because they are losing everybody. To have Netanyahu go on the Nelk boys, that is a Hail Mary. That is we got to do whatever we possibly can do, and that's totally backfired on him. And I'm glad to see it. Bassem knocked it out of the park, and the rebuttal that was more valuable to me than whatever Netanyahu's propaganda speech was prior to that. So I think it was actually a net negative for Israel. And I think that's what they're finding is all these shows, unless they have somebody that's completely controlled, is going to be a net negative for them. They've totally lost control of the narrative and they're not getting it back.
We're very clearly under occupation, and our tax dollars are being spent on genociding people under the justification of the hostages. Everyone's sick of it. Everyone's waking up, and Israel's realizing the only support base they have are Americans. Nobody else in the world likes Israel. There's not one country that is supportive and is giving them this amount of military aid and that is keeping their narrative alive. They tried last second with Nelk Boys. They even tried with PBD. That one was confusing. I thought PBD had some sort of backbone, but that made me lose respect.
Well done to the guys for addressing Israeli Hasbara agents Tommy Robinson and PBD and calling them out for the shills that they are. Dan was spot on when he said the Muslim immigration fear-mongering we hear about is once again Israeli propaganda, especially when we consider the majority of mass immigration to the UK comes from Indian Hindus, while in the US it primarily consists of non-Muslim Latinos and once again Indians. Dan also claimed that it was Jewish NGOs that are behind the open border policies in the West, a fact that the majority of these so-called so-called anti-immigration and pro-Israel patriots are unaware of. The guys also took shots at Piers Morgan and Tucker Carlson for not abandoning the Israeli side sooner. However, to be fair, at the very least they have eventually done so, and are now using their massive platforms to expose the Israeli regime for the monsters that they are. As Dan said, Israel is in panic mode due to how badly they're losing the PR war, so much so they've put Netanyahu on a promo tour as if he's trying to sell drop shipping courses to gullible teenagers, which needless to say has backfired completely, as Dan pointed out. And as Sneako said, everyone is sick of Israel's blatant lies and corruption, and that is why they have lost global support. Let's watch the next clip.
They have 250 U.S. politicians taking a picture in Israel right now while they give $650 million to Israel military aid, and Marco Rubio signs legislation to ban you from the U.S. if you criticize Israel.
That's insanity, right? And so if you're a small group and you have a disproportionate amount of power, you're going to want the large group as divided as humanly possible, especially if you are, funding a genocide, if you are, blackmailed, if you're committing treason, if you're doing all the things that these people are doing right now, you're going to want people as distracted and divided as humanly possible. And that's what we have right now. We have massive division. The fact that all of our congressmen are over there, they're kissing the wall, they have to hide their crosses, they're wearing those stupid little hats. And not only are they stealing from us by giving our money away to these parasites, but they're also sucking the value out of the dollar by the day by just printing more and more. Like how the fuck is there a private bank that could just print US dollars and then decide what interest rate they want to charge our government? What a scam that is. That's devaluing everything that you own in the world. That's devaluing your house, your stocks, everything. That's stealing from you on a whole different level, which is what these Jews are doing. And Muslims and Christians need to unite. This whole blind, unabashed support of Israel is something that everybody can recognize as a problem. And until we solve that, until we solve the fact that our government is compromised, like the rest of this stuff is irrelevant.
Is Trump completely, so is he capable of steering this country in the right direction?
No, he's a complete piece of shit. He's a total sellout. Thankfully, people have figured out his bullshit a lot quicker than I expected. He's a total fraud. He only cares about himself. He's completely compromised. His covering up the Epstein files should tell you everything you need to know. His arrogance is shocking. He absolutely does not have the country's best interest in mind. MAGA is a complete hoax. This is make Israel great again. It has nothing to do with America. And, he's been a complete disaster. It's obviously, because of this Jewish supremacy that, he's in on and, won't say a word about.
What's the likelihood that Trump himself is compromised on the Epstein Island, that he's blackmailed?
I mean, he's in the files. That's come out. I don't think that anybody debates that. But whether he's compromised because of that or because, they've got, because they bailed him out or he was in debt or they could send him to prison or they have, a tape of him fucking a little boy or because, a lot of the donors he's protecting. I don't know what the reason is, but he's unequivocally compromised. It's not a maybe, it's 100%. Right now they're taking Gaza, it's just like distraction. Let's go bomb Iran. We don't want to release the Epstein files. Let's go bomb another country. People are focused on that. Like, oh, he's not released the Epstein files. Let's go bomb some random boat in international waters. It's deflection, distraction. The whole, Trump scam when they, pretended like they shot his ear or whatever. And he came up and he says, fight, and they got all the camera guys there. But it was all show. It was all WWE bullshit. And if you look at how bad they scripted it, like who the fuck gets shot and comes up and says, fight, it's like the cheesiest, gayest fucking thing I would ever come up with. Like, look, if he had a gun, there was somebody that shot at him, he came up with shot back, that's a whole different fucking animal. But coming up and yelling fight when there's an active shooter and you don't have a gun, like, fight, what fight who, dumbass? Like, what do you want the crowd to go run after this fucking guy unarmed? Like, it's just the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And the Secret Service allowed him to do it, and he came up with blood on the ear, but he's got no fucking scar, and then the perfect picture with the fucking flag in the background. Like, come on, dude. Like, now looking back, like, it was such theatrics, and it didn't feel authentic either at the time. The fact that, like, all of our politicians are, waving Israeli flags in their office, the picture that the president chose to honor Charlie had an Israeli flag in the background. Like, yes, that's a fucking problem. The fact that 250 of our congressmen are in Israel is treason, and we need to wake the up and do something about it come this next election cycle.
Sneako was 100% right to put every single US politician shilling for the Israeli regime on blast, including Marco Rubio and Donald Trump. I was unaware that 250 American politicians were currently in Israel doing photo ops, and that the US has just given a further $650 million to Israel to continue their killing spree, as Sneako pointed out. As Dan said, this is insanity and should be viewed as an act of treason by everyday American citizens. The outrage that Dan Bilzerian and Sneako expressed at these compromised US officials selling out their country is what every American should be feeling. And that extends to everyone in any Western nation that funds Israel, especially since they're devaluing our respective currencies and giving away our hard-earned taxes to these parasites, as Dan put it. I completely agree with Dan Bilzerian's stance on Donald Trump, as in Trump is a selfish fraud and compromised sellout that puts Israel before America. And the fact that Trump won't release the Epstein files, which again is to protect Israel from being exposed for blackmailing their political rivals through the evil act of child trafficking, just further incriminates Trump as being mixed up in the whole thing. Dan made sense when he broke down how he thinks the Trump shooting incident during his 2024 election campaign was staged by Israel to ensure he got elected. And in order for US citizens to break free from Israel's stranglehold, they need to vote strategically against all pro-Israel candidates from now on. Let's watch the last clip.
Jews have been historically the aggressors that try and paint themselves as victims. And you look at the history of Israel's foundation, they bombed the King David Hotel, done all these false flag attacks. You look at a lot of what the Jews did. I mean, the goal of the Levant affair, where they were planting explosives in US and British cinemas, libraries, whatever, like the stated goal by them was to blame that on the Muslim Brotherhood. So they've been caught so many times doing these false flag attacks. And many of the times the false flag attacks is to vilify Muslims and unite us to go fight their wars for them. So it's like, how many times do you need to see the same example to start recognizing the pattern? It's like, these people have done this so many fucking times, you know, is it so hard to believe that they would do it again?
What do you think really happened on 9/11?
Planes, you know, crashed into the towers, but that's not what brought the towers down. Building 7 wasn't touched. Building 7 fell, and it fell hours afterwards. And by the way, the BBC announced it 30 minutes before it fell. They announced that it had already fallen. That's a little strange. On live television, they announced that Building 7 fell. You know, Building 7 wasn't even hit, and then 30 minutes later it falls. Like, a controlled demolition takes a while, and you know, you have to plant the explosives in there, and it's a whole thing. Well, there was Israeli art students that were having access to the World Trade Center for like over a month prior to it going down. Who benefited from, you know, the Twin Towers going down? Israel, because we went and fought their wars. And, you know, Netanyahu came and, you know, he lobbied for us to fight those wars. Twin Towers fell, and that was the catalyst. That was what allowed them to pass the Patriot Act, and that allowed us to, you know, go murder 1 million Iraqi civilians and, you know, go topple their regime, which was supposedly going to have positive reverberations throughout the region, according to Netanyahu, and that was a complete lie, just like everything else that he's told us. What was it, like 70 Mossad agents that were over there that they caught, that they apprehended? I mean, they had the 5 where they had video of them celebrating and filming it before it was happening. Literally, while the plane was like flying into the Trade Center, they got a picture of the guy holding up a lighter, taking photos, smiling, and then they're like Mossad agents. They find explosive residue in the van, and they release these guys, and the guy that released them was Jewish, right? Like, I mean, it's just fucking absurd. There's a staggering amount of evidence. I mean, there was, you know, a bunch of Jews that didn't show up for work that day. Larry Silverstein, the guy that double insured the buildings, you know, that was the only day that he's ever missed of work. Like, I mean, it's just like, at some point you got to be like, this is ridiculous.
So where did the Jews go? I mean, if they've been expelled from 109 countries, now they have their own state, which was allowed since 1948. They look at what this state has done since they were established. What happens now if Israel doesn't have the right to exist?
Jews have been a problem since before Israel's inception. Bolshevik genocide, the Holodomor, those were all before Israel's inception. Clipping of coins, poisoning of wells, crucifying children. That shit happened prior to Israel's inception. They killed tens of millions of Christians. They burned down 40,000 plus Christian churches. What was an 80-something% Russian Orthodox Christian country. And this was Jewish leadership running the Bolshevik, which was anti-Christian, which was anti-religion. And the first thing they did is make it illegal to criticize Jews. So acting like this has only become a problem with the creation of Israel is just ignoring history. And you look at when Judeo-Christian values, when that started to be mentioned, I believe it started in the 70s. This was not something like our country was founded upon. This came with that whole propaganda thing, we've absolutely unequivocally been lied to. You just have to unlearn a lot of things.
When we hear about Israel's dark history in regards to numerous false flag attacks Dan listed off, some of which are the biggest acts of extremism the world has ever witnessed, it's actually mind-blowing how little they seem to value human life. Especially when we consider how sinister Israel's motives are, to commit numerous acts of terror and then to blame them on Muslims, just to get a supposed ally, the US in this case, to fight wars on your behalf in order for you to conquer more land is the epitome of evil. As Dan said, this is a formula the Zionist regime uses on repeat to this very day. Dan gave a detailed description of how Israel throughout history is implicated in bombing British and American cinemas, hotels and libraries, as well as 9/11 and the Iraq War. And if we add in the attack on the USS Liberty, as well as incidents like the JFK assassination and now the Charlie Kirk shooting, it leaves no room for Israel's involvement to be considered just a coincidence or a conspiracy theory. Sneako was of the opinion that these problems are a result of Israel's invasion and colonization of historic Palestine in 1948, when they first formed their fake country. However, Dan seems to think the problem of Jewish supremacy is an age-old issue, especially when it comes to the oppression of Christians. As a Muslim, I cannot stereotype an entire ethnicity or religious group in this way, as the Quran teaches us otherwise. But I also can't deny that the majority of the world's problems stem from the apartheid ethno-state of Israel and the evil ideology of Zionism they are driven by. Thank you for watching. Make sure to join my free Telegram group via the link in the description. And remember to like, subscribe and become a channel member for access to exclusive content. Until next time, inshallah, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allah.